Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure which parts of the Endangered Species Act apply to my district, the nation's capital, District of Columbia, except for members of Congress who may be endangered in the upcoming election. But I can tell you this, that iconic parts of the nation's capital are located in a floodplain, so I have listened very carefully to this Oregon testimony and appreciate it. Indeed, I've just finished working with FEMA on the 17th Street levee on the mall to prevent floods on the mall and the surrounding federal and homeowning communities. Just this week, I had a congressional briefing on flood risks to the nation's capital, the District of Columbia, throughout, because this city is located on the banks of two rivers, the Potomac and the Anacostia. Now, therefore, when we heard what has occurred with Oregon, despite our understanding of the Endangered Species Act and how vital it is, one of the first questions that came to my mind, Mr. Grimm, was whether FEMA has the resources to potentially apply that model nationwide, if that's what you had to do. Because you answered to Mr. DeFazio that it should apply to all states, that it would apply to all states.
Yes, ma'am. The resource issue is a real issue. If this applies to 22,000 communities, it's not only a resource issue at FEMA and our regional offices to implement something of this magnitude, but to our state and local and tribal partners that would also be implementing the recommendations through the fisheries RPAs if we change our regulations to implement.
So nothing like that is envisioned, that in terms of its resources. At a time when we're trying to get resources just for vital life and death matters, this is a matter of some concern. I also listened very closely to Mr. Doyle's testimony because Beaverton, like the District of Columbia, wanted to expand its economic development. I have just had two really huge bills to come out of this Congress, one for the Southeast waterfront, the Southwest waterfront. The only way to expand in the nation's capital was to build right on the waterfront. We're very, very pleased with what's happening there, so I've been looking very closely at the land use decisions around there, which, by the way, have already been made and are going to bring us extraordinary amounts of revenue. Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Grimm, in light of Mr. Doyle's testimony, I want to get an understanding of public input in the prudent, reasonable, prudent alternative RPA process. Why there isn't, I mean, in this Congress, we're used to learning from the public. So virtually any regulation I can think of has public input, so we know what we're doing, both in terms of our own district and in terms of the administrative process itself. So why isn't there automatic public input of the kind that I'm sure you're used to? And should there be more public input, and how would you go about it?
Thank you. It's a unique process, federal to federal, and in fact, the engagement that FEMA had with NIMS during the development of the RPAs was unique. I personally was involved with discussions with NIMS, with the regional administrator.
Because I have one more question, I just want to know, is it possible to get input like input, for example, from Beaverton before all of this occurred?
Yes, ma'am. What we're going to do now, input wasn't necessarily conducted through the NIMS process in the development of the RPAs. That could be, I believe, done better. I can't speak on behalf of NIMS, However, now that the RPAs are out, FEMA's intent in implementing the RPAs is to work closely with state, community, and tribal partners to develop reasonable alternatives for any of the RPAs that aren't within our authorities and implement.
It's very important for the chairman to know what it is you intend to do about that input. Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, I just have one question about the flooding of the National Mall and the archives. In 2006, federal buildings in the Federal Triangle were flooded. Horrendous pictures. For example, I remember seeing a picture of the archives auditorium. The whole auditorium, or much of the front of the auditorium, was underwater. And that's all of IRS employees were put out of their headquarters for more than 6 months. So I have a real interest in who provides guidance. Does FEMA provide any guidance to federal agencies on their land use decisions and mitigation strategies? How do I know that the archives and the entire Federal Triangle is not going to be flooded again, or that they have, do I know that they have taken mitigation of the kind that states, for example, would be required to take?
Sure. Federal agencies comply with Executive Order 11988, which for floodplain management. So each federal agency is responsible for looking at, if they're in the floodplain, mitigation strategies to reduce damage.
Can you tell me whether that has been done for the Federal Triangle?
I don't, but we can follow up. And
Mr. Chairman, I would like that information submitted to the chairman, and I'm sure that they will give it to me. Very important for me to know that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair